Welcome to Move the Chains with Jonathan Rivers. Here's your host, Jonathan Rivers.
And let there be football. Welcome into Move the Chains. I'm your host, Jonathan Bam Rivers. So the seasons have come to a conclusion, NFL and college football. So because we do this every week out of the year, there is no offseason with Move the Chains. Today I want to kind of do a college football recap for 2024. Just kind of take a look at the season, big picture, and really highlight 3 points that I thought are important in the landscape of the sport. And secondly, no social media questions today, but I do want to get into the state of Alabama football. I know a lot of people that are close to this program. I know a lot of people that are diehard fans of this program. And based on what they feel, you would think Alabama's not in a good state. And I just think Alabama is in a state that any program would be in, considering the transition that they've had to deal with. So I'll give my thoughts on that as well. And in my nonsense narrative, listen, if you're a fan of that team on the Plains and the Auburn Tigers and you think you're set at quarterback, I just happen to believe that's a nonsense narrative. And it will continue to be until they change some things. And lastly, I don't care what you think you know about football. Remember, small moves matter. Small changes matter. Sometimes you focus on the macro, and it's the micro that's making the biggest impact. But all that and more here on Move the Chains. But you know how we do it. Let's kick it off with first down. All right, so as I sit back and I have conversations with my production team, and we always talk about opportunities on how we're going to grow the show and good content. And this week, as I sat back, I said, you know what, let me just do a recap on college football 2024. I think it was a phenomenal season. I said that this would be one of the most exciting seasons that we've seen in the past decade or two, and that's exactly what we got. So as you can see here, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the college football playoff being a success. I think the 12-team playoff expansion was good for college football, and I was somebody that was opposed to expansion when they started with 4 some years ago, but I think it was great. But I also think the biggest reason it was great was because it was in its inception, and I'll talk about that. I'm also going to talk about Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs. As you can see, I say they're on pace, ... And there's a reason I put that there, because they're on pace for a couple of different things. And I think it's something that if you're a Georgia fan and if you're somebody who follows the Georgia program, you'll really agree with what I'm saying, because you'll realize that changes have come almost dramatically in that program, even though you saw them happening. And lastly, I'm just going to talk about how much the transfer portal matters, and it matters differently for different people because they use it in different ways. And I think that's where I continue to talk about how college football is really mirroring and really emulating what the NFL is. But let me get to my first point about the college football playoff. So do you remember when Tennessee went to Ohio State? And they went on the road, and after the first drive, Tennessee was on the verge of forcing a fumble and getting the ball back. And when Ohio State was able to not have that happen because of a penalty, they were able to just railroad Tennessee at home. How often do you get games like that, right? Top 10 teams at night on that stage for those type marbles. You don't. So the atmosphere itself, I think, helped take college football in this season to a whole new level. But I think the biggest reason that the college football playoff was a success in my estimation with the way it's currently constructed was because it was the first year. And because it was fresh. And because it was new. Now, why do I bring that up? I bring that up because while it was a success, I won't deny it, there were a lot of flaws in the college football playoff. So again, it doesn't have to be flawless to be a success. So that's what I'm telling you. I would sign up for it again next year, which is what they're doing. And, of course, I think they're going to be expanding to 14 teams in the next year or two based on people who run college football or its participants. You've heard about the meetings between the Big Ten and the SEC commissioners on what they're trying to do with the playoff, and I'll get into that a little bit more on another show. But the point is, when you have the teams in the NCAA running the NCAA, they're going to do what benefits them the most. And what they think benefits them the most in this case is completely reseeding the field when it comes to the college football playoff. Because I think the fact that you had teams that were ranked one number and seeded another number strictly because they won conference championships, it didn't make sense. And I think here's the issue. They're trying to keep the old guard of college football when it comes to conference championships mattering this much more and this thing, and trying to implement it with the new mold of college football. Remember, you can't put old wineskins on new wineskins. And I think that's what happened here. So while it was a success, I'd say you have to keep it and move forward. You have to make changes. And I think that's one change that everybody can agree that needs to happen. I don't care what you were ranked if it's not seeded the same way. If you're a top 4 ranked team, then you should be seeded as one of the top 4 teams, because just because you won the Big 12 or the ACC or the SEC or the Big Ten doesn't mean you had a better record than the teams that are ranked ahead of you. How do I know that? Because they're ranked ahead of you. So for the committee to do that, if they keep that enacted, it's going to be a problem. But the playoff was a success in my estimation, although changes need to be made. All right, now as I move forward to Kirby Smart and Georgia, they're on pace. So on my graphic, I said they're on pace, ... which means there's more to come. Well, why would I do that in this case? Well, I think Georgia could be on pace for a multitude of things. I think Georgia could be on pace, one, to be one of the greatest college football programs in the last 3 decades, the same way Alabama grew that way under Nick Saban. But I also think Georgia is on pace to understand what it is to lose GTGs. And by GTGs, I mean go-to guys. Think about Georgia winning the national championship back-to-back in the 21 and the 22 seasons. I want you to think about what they had and who they had. I want you to think about Ladd McConkey in the slot and then transition to understanding what he was in the NFL as a rookie. I want you to look at Brock Bowers and understand that he just broke almost every rookie tight end record when he went to the Raiders. I want you to think about Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean, who were beasts on that Georgia defense, who are now celebrating a Super Bowl win with the Philadelphia Eagles. Nolan Smith, the same. One of the most underrated players, I think, when he was at Georgia, and one of the most underrated players in the NFL with the Philadelphia Eagles. He is also celebrating those rings. But you know who else is celebrating in the NFL? Hasn't won a Super Bowl yet in the NFL, but it's one of the best offensive coordinators is Tom Monken. Because to me, you have to understand how great this Georgia offense looked under Tom Monken and then how the Baltimore Ravens looked when he got there. When you're Georgia, you've got 4 and 5 stars. You've got the Branch brothers coming in from USC this year. You've got talent. You've got Gunnar Stockton, who was, a 4 or 5 star guy that you recruited to presumably be your starting quarterback. But you had top-tier players that also played early on that you also recruited. So at that point in time, the transfer portal was beneficial to you, but you didn't have to use it the way you're using it now. So in my estimation, Georgia is on pace to do a lot of great things, but Georgia's also on pace to understand the growing pains of having so much great talent leave the door. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Stetson Bennett. Remember the guy who could never get on the field, whom everybody thought was just a throwaway, who was a walk-on, who wasn't really that talented in everybody's minds. And all he did was help lead you to back-to-back championships, and now he's on an NFL roster playing for the Rams. So talent matters. And yes, you have to have the next man up mentality. But, man, understanding that the next man up that you're replacing when they're first-round picks and they're all pros and pro bowlers as soon as they get into the league, it matters. All right, so lastly, I want to talk about the transfer portal and it mattering. Now, everybody knows the transfer portal matters. My point in this is it matters more for certain teams because certain teams know how to use it. We talked about this with Ohio State. The transfer portal for them was to accentuate the talent that they already had. They went and cherry-picked guys like Caleb Downs and Quinshon Judkins to make their program more elite. They were already an elite program, but now they're a championship-level program, which is what they weren't. Guys like Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter for Colorado, these guys were program changers. And at the same time, they were program developers. You know what Colorado was before they got there with Coach Sanders. But they had to come in and set a culture, so those guys were program changers in addition to program developers. So the transfer portal matters because it indicates how well you use the talent that you've had to seek out. So remember, this is just like you going out in free agency and identifying talent that will fit the needs of your program. And that's what some of the best teams have done. So if you're using the transfer portal, having 15 transfers on your roster is all well and good, but if 2 of them are productive for you, then you didn't do what you needed to do. And of course, you've got presumably the number 1, 2, or 3 pick in Cam Ward, who helped transition Miami, who is a good program and a good team. And now they're going to have to continue to refurbish that talent, which I think Mario Cristobal will do a great job of doing. All right, when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about the state of the Alabama program. You don't want to miss it. Back when we'll move the chains right after this. Welcome back in the Move the Chains. And before we get started with Second Down, as always, I want to take this opportunity to thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for hosting Move the Chains. Secondly, I want to thank you, the fans, whether you're watching on the Sports Leader Fox 54 on YouTube or watching my community on TikTok. I appreciate everybody and having this opportunity. And lastly, the best production crew in the business, man. My production team, from the director to the producer to my YouTube team to my social media team, everybody that has anything to do with the growth and development of the show, I'm truly appreciative of what it is that you do. All right, having said all that, you know what time it is. It's time for Second Down. All right, the state of Alabama's program. Let me get the graphic, Josiah and Ernest. I just want to show you Alabama's schedule. I'm not going to go through this in detail because going through the schedule in detail to me is irrelevant in this time. What's relevant is what the schedule indicates. It just indicates how high of a ceiling Alabama has, but yet how a lot of times they play to their floor, and I think that was the story of their season. I know my producer, Josiah, who follows that Alabama program closely, he continued to say after they beat Georgia, listen, I'm very concerned about Vanderbilt next week because I think that Alabama's not looking at Vanderbilt as a pliable option and a viable option of them losing. And I said, well, hey, I think Alabama wins. They might not blow them out, but I think Alabama's a better team and they'll win the game. And he was correct in that motion. But this is what I'll say as well. Hey, I want you to understand who Alabama's new offensive coordinator is. It's Ryan Grubb. Do you know why this is important? Well, because Grubb was the offensive coordinator at Washington under Kalen DeBoer. Well, you're asking yourself, well, why wasn't he the offensive coordinator last year? Why was it Nick Sheridan, who was also on the staff at Washington? Well, because Grubb took an NFL job to be the offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. So you're not going to pass up an NFL opportunity to be an offensive coordinator. But see, now everything is back in hand. So when I think about the state of this program, they're trying to find a familiarity. That's what I truly believe about Kalen DeBoer. Because I don't care how good of a coach you were at Washington. This is not me degrading Washington. Remember, the Pac-12 was phenomenal in its last year of it being full and being total. All I'm saying is when you transition, not just to a program in the SEC, but to another Power 4 program in general, you have to create opportunities to be familiar with something. And there were a lot of the players he wasn't familiar with. He tried to build his coaches and bring over players through the transfer portal, and Alabama finished 9-4. And I know a lot of people don't like the fact that they didn't make the college football playoff. I don't think they deserve to make it, but I also don't think that Alabama's in a position right now where they deserve to be looked at as if a program is deteriorating. The program is in transition in a lot of different areas. Now, when it comes to players being late throughout the season, I think that's a big issue. And I think that's what happens when you have coaches and assistant coaches and assistant coaches and new players and other staff members and strength and conditioning coaches and NIL collective. All of these moving pieces are not yet gelling as one. So that's what they are. The state of the program is still one of the best recruiting programs in the nation. They're going to get one of the most talented players consistently day in, day out, whether it's through traditional recruiting or through the transfer portal. But they're just trying to find a familiar footing. And that also involves creating a culture. And it's going to be Kalen DeBoer's culture. I've always been a proponent of giving a new coach 3 or 4 years to develop his program. Don't care who it is and don't care where they are, and that's going to stay the same for them. So if you're Alabama and if you're a fan, you may be upset about the way the season ended last year, but understand that you're moving forward into a new era. Now, I don't know what that era will look like in terms of championships, but it's a new era, so you might as well get ready for it. All right, when we come back from the break, it'll be my nonsense narrative. Auburn has their quarterback position set. I just don't believe it. Back when we'll move the chains right after this. All right, welcome back to the show. So first down, I kind of gave you my recap of college football in 2024. I just finished talking about the state of the Alabama program. So here in my nonsense narrative, I might as well talk about their most hated rival, right? One of the best rivals in all of collegiate sports in my nonsense narrative. So I don't want to delay it any longer. Let's hit it. All right, so quarterback is the most important position on the field. Everybody knows that when it comes to football. But, you know, in college, you could get away with not having great quarterback play because this isn't a salary cap sport. This isn't a sport to where it's designed to make things equitable amongst teams like the NFL is. Now, I continue to say that college football is evolving into a very similar product like the NFL, and it's really now the minor leagues, the way it should have been. It's a feeder. But what I think is, I think we're in a situation to where quarterbacks now more than ever, because of the changing in the landscape of college football, matters. Remember, Alabama wasn't in the great development of quarterback eras until they started getting guys like Mac Jones and Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts and all those guys, right? Bryce Young winning the Heisman. But I want you to take a look at Auburn's quarterback list since 2011. The Barrett Trotter era, was that an era in college football? The Kyle Frazier era, was that an era in college football? Jeremy Johnson out of Montgomery was supposed to be one of the biggest talents in college football. Didn't work out that way. You look at Nick Marshall, the reason my producer highlighted it because Nick Marshall by far was the best quarterback in terms of his play, his production, and the results of that program. And I want you to look at this. The programs that Auburn has had that they've been successful with as a quarterback where are they in terms of their recruiting? They were transfers, right? So what does that make you feel about Auburn moving forward? And if you look at the quarterback room now, Jackson Arnold, right? If you look at Deuce Knight, who's just come in and a transfer from Stanford, there are 3 quarterbacks that are now on top of Auburn's depth chart that weren't even on the roster last year. They weren't even on the roster. Jackson Arnold was at Oklahoma. Deuce Knight wasn't even in college. And remember, he was a decommit from Notre Dame, so if you want to be technical about it, Auburn wasn't even his first choice. Now, this doesn't mean that Auburn can't succeed at quarterback, but what I'm telling you is they went out and got Peyton Thorne from Michigan State for the last 2 years, and to me, he was never cemented as a starter, even though he started the majority of games. Do you remember when Hank Brown came in, who was no longer on this roster as well because he transferred and started, a handful of games? So Auburn, in a situation now to where a quarterback in college football is more important than he's ever been, there's very much instability at that position. And for all of the talent that Auburn has around them, if they want to be a consistent contender in the SEC and in the landscape of college football, they have to solidify this quarterback spot. And we'll see if it starts in Hugh Freeze's 3rd year. All right, when we come back for the break, it'll be the final drive here on Move the Chains. We'll be back right after this. And welcome back into the show, and it's time for the final segment of the show, so you know what that means. It's time for the final drive. Look, small moves matter when it comes to college football. And the reason I'm saying this is because I talked about the transfer portal earlier, and everybody focuses on the 4 or 5 star from Ohio State going to Bama, or Bama going to Ohio State, or Georgia leaving to go to Ole Miss, or what have you. But guys, the change in strength and conditioning coaches matter. The fact that you are a new head coach and you don't have the offensive or the defensive coordinator that you want because they had to leave and go to the NFL, or you having somebody on your staff that is now a new head coach and they take some of your players with them. Those things matter. So as you break down these teams, understand that the smallest of moves may have the biggest of impacts on your season. All right, so remember, you can not only catch Move the Change right here on the Sports Leader WXTX Fox 54, but you can also catch us on YouTube. Make sure you go to @move_the_chains. Subscribe, like, comment. We're here for all of it. Hey, it's been another banger. We're in the off season, which means we're not slowing down. All right, for the best production crew in the business, for my social media team and my YouTube crew, I am Jonathan Bam Rivers. And as always, until next time right here on Move the Chains, God bless.